Princess Alina, who had a super tragic fate, found herself back in her 3-year-old body and hatched a plan. She decided she didn't need any family from now on, and that's when Alina's journey to independence began. The girl jumped into baking, mines, and all sorts of other businesses. She worked her fingers to the bone to make more money. Even her dad, who always ignored her, started acting differently and declared an international holiday for the day Alina called him Dad. The story kicks off when the stolen princess is found in a wooden crate at a warehouse. Alina throws herself into her dad's arms as he apologizes for being so late. Since the princess was finally found, the emperor announced the search was over and it was time to go home. Meanwhile, our main character lies tied up in the box, and for some reason, no one even thinks to look for her. She was so tired of being the background character that tears of frustration stream down her cheeks. One day, she realizes she's stuck in a novel, and her role is just a background noble. Reveler was even happy about being a super rich kid at first, but it turned out to be an illusion that shattered in an instant. Her dad taught her to always chase knowledge. His loyalty to the emperor had no limits, and he served with every part of his heart. That's why Reveler didn't get why such a loyal family to the royal line was never mentioned in the original story. It was all because of Tyrant Emperor Liam Curtis Rastall's obsession with his daughter. The daughter calling him Daddy was a happy event, but turning it into a celebration was pretty weird. Duke Felicity was the only one who dared to voice his opinion about it. He didn't get why the emperor decided to give his daughter a whole blood-soaked country, thinking it wasn't worthy of her highness. The emperor lost his cool and accused the duke of disrespecting the princess. His Majesty saw it as proof that the Felicity family had conspired with the enemy. By imperial order, Rayler's parents were sentenced to execution for treason. The girl lost her family when she was just 7 years old. Crying uncontrollably, she ran out of the burning estate. She lost not just her beloved parents, but everyone even remotely connected to the Felicity family. With all her might, she ran from the pursuers through the woods. In her mind, she mourned that her dad was the one who stood up to the tyrant. The little girl didn't have the strength to outrun the knights, and was eventually captured. Right then, Rayler vowed to herself she'd never follow her father's traitorous path. But fate had other plans, and the girl was given a chance to escape in exchange for serving the princess. Revealer was moved to the palace and made the royal princess's personal food taster to check for poison in meals and drinks. When they first snatched the girl, the emperor's subjects stared long at her pink hair and the crest on her dress. There was no mistake, she was definitely the daughter of traitor Duke Felicity. The knight declared that the princess would decide the girl's fate, and if luck was on her side, she'd be shipped off to the mines. However, it wasn't out of the question that Revealer would just be left on the magical Beast Mountain. Some woman who'd also ended up in the dungeon told the girl to accept whatever punishment came with dignity. Revealer couldn't believe they'd send a girl as fragile as her to a mine to swing a pickaxe. As for the magical Beast Mountain, not even Imperial Knights came back alive from there. It didn't make sense that a child could be treated this cruelly, but she forced herself to stay calm and find a way out. With her thoughts in order, Revealer suddenly realized the fall of House Felicity hadn't been detailed in the original story, meaning, as long as she stayed as far away from the princess as possible, Revealer had a shot at reclaiming her peaceful life. That meant it didn't matter if she ended up in the mines or anywhere else. Hope was still there. At that moment, the girl decided to craft her own happy ending outside the original story. But fate, through the princess, had other plans, and Revealer became Elend's taster. When the maid loomed like a storm cloud over the girl and delivered the news, the heroine's insides froze. She just couldn't figure out why everything turned out this way. Now Revealer's a taster, someone who samples the food for poison before an imperial family member eats. Yeah, a lot of people see it as a privilege, but the job's super dangerous. Every day, the taster risks their life. While tasting every dish from the princess's upcoming dinner, Revealer hoped with every bite that the food wasn't poisoned. Alina burst into the dining hall, her bright smile lighting up the whole place. The maids were thrilled by their sweet mistress and happy to have a chance to chat with her. Suddenly, Alina spotted a strange girl sitting at the table and asked the maids who she was. The maids explained it was the very girl their highness had saved from execution. Feeling the princess's curious gaze, Revealer tried to avoid contact at all costs. But friendly Alina didn't let the girl feel left out. She rushed over right away. She noted how incredibly cute Revealer was, and asked if she liked the food. Then the princess held out her hand and declared she couldn't wait to spend time with her. Later, lying in her room, the girl couldn't wrap her head around how things had turned out. The truth was, she hated the food. Prison bread had actually tasted better. But Revealer never could have guessed one of the princess's lines about sending kids to jail being cruel would change her fate so completely. The current timeline matched the end of the first novel part. Then there's a huge time jump until Alina grows up, and the events 10 years later are covered. Even though the heroine roughly remembered the original story, she knew little about that time period. Still, she knew for sure that if she did nothing, death would soon be coming for her. Truth was, Revaler wanted to run away on the very first day she met Elena. But living in the Imperial Palace was a top priority. That's why the heroine had to find a way to fight off poisons and stay alive. Then she suddenly remembered. In the second novel part, when the princess was near death from an unknown poison, a magical rapier flower brought her back. Revaler was determined to get her hands on it no matter what. There were tons of exotic plants in the palace. She just had to remember what it looked like. So she headed to the Imperial Library to grab a botanical encyclopedia. But the librarian said traders couldn't touch Imperial property and kicked her out. Revaler tried to explain it would help her do her job as taster better. The Duke in the library overheard the argument, and watching the girl, realized the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. When he heard the librarian accuse Revaler of trying to poison the princess, he hurled a heavy book at his face. The Duke barked at the man to shut up. He said if the librarian wants to bark, he better take it outside. The girl trembled as she watched what was happening. She just couldn't figure out how Duke Cassius Witchleberry suddenly showed up right beside her. This guy was Felicity's family's sworn enemy, a lapdog for the Imperial family. The Duke had earned a reputation as a ruthless war demon. In the original story, he was the main puppet master, pulling all the strings from the shadows. Revaler had heard he didn't spare even kids, so she panicked and started thinking about how to get away from him as fast as she could. When the Duke reached for the girl, she let out a scream of terror. Revaler froze as Cassius suddenly scooped her up, gave her a thorough once-over, and declared she was fine. As the heroine tried to wrap her head around what was going on, the librarian regained consciousness and started ranting about Cassius's behavior. The man declared that even though he was a duke, he didn't have the right to act like that toward anyone. Cassius pulled the girl into a hug and shot the librarian such a cold look, he vanished behind the door in a flash. As she stepped back down to the floor, Revaler's mind was already racing on how she could get her hands on that encyclopedia. She was already thinking she might have to go ahead and steal the book. But right then, the heroine realized she could leverage the Duke's inexplicable kindness. Gathering her courage, the girl asked him to help her again and lend her a botany book. To Revaler's surprise, Cassius didn't hesitate at all. He agreed to help her right away. She explained that, as the princess's taster, she needed to know more about poisonous and medicinal plants. The Duke listened to the girl in silence, his attention unwavering. Then he promised his knight would deliver the book she needed. Revaler rushed to thank the Duke for his unexpected kindness. She promised she'd someday repay Lord Witchleberry for his help. The girl bowed again to the Duke and headed back to her room. When she left, Cassius asked his assistant Hanan how the investigation into his assigned case was going. He reported that, as expected, there was a traitor in Felicity's family. According to him, the princess had boarded a ship bound for Postarimo. That's likely why she couldn't reach their knights. The Duke knew what that meant. Bringing her back wouldn't be easy. About 2 months ago, Cassius's forces had been pushing forward, steadily seizing Postarimo. It was a crucial strategic location for the Allied troops. That's when Witchleberry got a letter from Duke Felicity. He was asked to look after his daughter and be her support. After a short pause, Cassius told Hanan to bring the girl a botanical encyclopedia. At that moment, he realized he should be nicer to Revaler, who was clearly just as weak-willed as her dad. The next day, the heroine was tending to her garden work as the princess galloped around on horseback. Revaler grumbled through her pastries, wondering why princesses in these stories always have such a sweet tooth. Last night, the Duke kindly sent the girl the encyclopedia she'd requested. But with this non-stop dessert parade, she didn't have a second to actually read it. She'd eaten so much she could barely catch her breath. She glared at the princess, who was carelessly riding circles and didn't seem to have any intention of getting off her horse. Elaine caught the girl staring, smiled and winked. Revaler could only hope these riding lessons would end soon. The heroine narrowed her eyes at the knight teaching the princess. Something about his face felt familiar. She remembered Cain Ashley, the princess's personal hound who'd been in the front lines when the Felicity family was attacked. Revaler stabbed her fork into another pastry, silently wishing the heavens would strike this guy down. And just then, Ashley's horse suddenly reared up, sending the knight crashing to the ground. The princess immediately rushed to her subject's side, who didn't miss a beat in declaring how honored he was by her concern. While they traded pleasantries, Revaler ignored them completely, savoring the amazing taste of marshmallow. Thanks to Ashley falling off his horse, the girl finally had some free time. She grabbed an encyclopedia and plopped down in the shade of a tree to look up the info she needed. Finally, Rapier found the page describing the rapier flower. This plant has 6 sweet-smelling petals, and you'll find it growing near manishi trees, always in the shade. You could tell it wasn't in the palace gardens. The trees are usually crawling with pests, and they don't grow them there often. They probably only grew in the dead forest, which was weird since the hero's house was right next to that creepy place. But Rapier wasn't scared. All she had to do was find the flower. Bursting with excitement, she jumped up, ready to give it her all and finally be happy. Turns out, Rapier wasn't alone in the garden. A boy was sitting under the next tree, watching her weird moves out of the corner of his eye. The hero blushed, totally confused about how long he'd been watching or who he even was. She caught the telltale crimson eyes of the royal family, that perfect face, and the old-fashioned clothes. But the character had never appeared in the original story, and Aelin was definitely an only child. Trying to make sense of it, Rapier walked over and asked, "What's your name?" He just turned away without a word. And that's when she saw he was standing on a little bouquet of flowers by some grave. Rapier blushed, scooped up the flowers, mumbled an apology, and dashed off to get a fresh bunch. When she came back with a new bouquet, she hesitated, then asked whose grave it was. The stranger shrugged, bored. "It won't matter if you find out." Aelin perked up at the sound of his voice. Then the boy suddenly said, "It's my parents' grave." Rapier flinched at the flat tone. "You and your family never got along, huh?" That's when she remembered swearing to herself never turn into her father. Looking at the kid, she felt like she was staring at her own reflection. The weight of it all made her look away. She pressed her palms together in prayer, apologizing to the graves for disturbing their peace. Then she spun around, grabbed his hand, and pressed it to her chest. The kid blinked in confusion. "I'm sharing my strength with you," she said. "From now on, only good stuff happens." Rapier promised this week would be quiet, next one all smiles. "You'll be so happy," she said. "Your saddest memories will fade away." The kid stared for a beat, then yanked his hand away. "You happy yourself?" Rapier smiled. "I will be," she said. "Same certainty." She snatched up an encyclopedia, flipped to a page, and asked, "You ever seen this flower?" She asked him to let her know if he happened to run into a rapier flower. Then Rapier waved him off without waiting for his reply and took off, promising to meet again. The boy watched her leave, pressed his palm, where she'd held it, to his chest, and wondered what her words meant. A few days later, Aelin rushed to the emperor to present him with a cake. The princess baked the cake herself for Thanksgiving, to express her feelings to her father. The emperor ruffled her hair, marveling how she managed the baking. When he said he couldn't wait to taste it, Aelin threw herself into his arms. Nearby, Rapier sat at her post, saddened that she still hadn't found the rapier flower. No matter how hard she looked, the plant was nowhere to be found. And she never got to ask that boy, since they hadn't run into each other since. The heroine was starting to think that flower didn't even grow in the dead forest. Searching for the rapier had kept Rapier up for days. Now her eyes were drooping. Then she overheard the maids talking about how, from now on, they'd need to request an audience with the princess before the Duke of Betrayal's visits. They said another clash had happened in Posterimo recently. Hearing this, Rapier thought whatever she'd given the Duke that day must have been useful after all. The heroine glanced at the Emperor and Aelin. She didn't plan to seek revenge, but that didn't mean she'd forgiven them. Rapier would do anything to prevent the Emperor from dying an easy death. But suddenly, the girl noticed a stream of blood trickling from her mouth onto her pristine white plate. The maid rushed to the Emperor's table, knocked the cake to the floor, and the knights sprinted over too. Rapier lay on the ground in a pool of her own blood, terrified of dying. If only she'd found that flower, none of this would have happened. A boy with red eyes nearby heard the commotion in the castle courtyard and dropped the rapier flower from his hands. Rapier was racked with unbearable pain. She couldn't breathe, so she clawed at the grass beneath her in desperation. Duke Cassius approached, lifted her head from the ground, called her by name, and she burst into tears, mistaking him for her father. She remembered how her father told her to stop bottling up negative emotions and just let them go. He tried to explain that she shouldn't cling to grudges or regrets. If something terrible happened that you couldn't let go of, just smile. It'd make it easier. At the time, Rapier didn't get why her father said something so complicated, and she should have figured out his real intentions. Later, she learned the Duke wanted nothing more than for his daughter to forget everything and find happiness. The heroine sobbed, clinging to her parents' shadows and begging them to come back, insisting she was wrong. If only she'd been more careful, and her memory had come back sooner. Now Rapier wasn't sure if she could just let it go and move on without holding a grudge. A butterfly with magical glowing wings fluttered over the imperial castle. It circled the area and darted straight through her window. A boy stood by her bed, clutching a bunch of rapier flowers, listening as she called out for her father in a feverish delirium. After a week, Raveler finally came to, even though she still felt like she was dying. She never would have guessed the Duke would come to her rescue again, let alone give her her own private room. She was sitting up in bed when Hanan walked in, and that's when Raveler finally figured out why Cassius had helped her. He showed up at the castle that day because he wanted to know, face to face, where she'd gotten that information. The intel included secret letters exchanged between the late emperor and the former Duke of Betrayal. Those letters were buried in the late ruler's personal belongings. Hanan asked if she had any more info, because thanks to her, they'd gotten their land back from the emperor. She apologized, but insisted she only knew what her father had told her. She said sorry, but Hanan emphasized how much their help meant to them and left the room. That incident made Raveler realize her life might hinge on something as simple as one plant. And with that kind of power at stake, she couldn't afford to work with a puppet master like Vishelberry. But her conscience wouldn't let her rest. These people had saved her, and she was refusing to return the favor. Raveler tried to push those thoughts aside, telling herself she couldn't be that naive. Staying alive was her top priority. Right then, she caught the sweet scent of flowers on her nightstand. She hopped off the bed and leaned in to make sure. They were Rapunzel blooms. Even though Raveler didn't remember the kid showing up or feeding her flower petals to heal her, she had no doubt he was the one who left these. She owed him a huge debt now, and decided they had to meet up. So she wrote him a letter. She drafted a note she thought would make him come running. She folded it into a tiny origami boat and sprinted to leave it at the tomb. She figured she'd handle the Duke later. Her door creaked open just then. At the doorstep with a basket, the princess beamed that Raveler was finally up. As Aline bombarded her with questions about how she felt, Raveler tried to figure out why she was here and how she knew her name. Raveler didn't get to say a word before the princess dashed over. She started taking her temperature to make sure she was healthy enough to leave bed. Suddenly, Alina's eyes filled with tears, and she started apologizing to the girl. She said she'd never make Raveler do something like that. The girl couldn't figure out why the princess was acting like they'd known each other for ages. Grabbing the stunned girl by the hand, Alina suddenly offered her the spot as her lady-in-waiting. But Raveler tried to argue, saying she was the court taster, and the princess told her to quit that risky gig. The girl was so blown away by the princess's people skills that she couldn't even get a word out. The princess let her take her time deciding, and Raveler thanked her for looking out for her. Alina didn't think twice about it, and was just excited to finally get to hang out with the girl for a while. The girl was so shocked by the princess's communication skills, she couldn't even get a word out. But just then, someone interrupted Elena, demanding she come right away. Turns out the knights who went after magical beasts were back. The princess promised to catch up later and turned to leave. But as she turned to go, Elena spotted the flowers on the nightstand and couldn't help but admire them. The girl froze mid-bow, her heart suddenly pounding faster. When Elena asked where she'd picked them, Raveler said she found them just nearby. The princess said she loves purple flowers because her dad first gave her purple peonies. Suddenly, she turned to Raveler and asked for the flowers. Then the heroine realized things weren't going as well as they seemed at first. Clutching her dress, she let the princess take the flowers, but inside, she was furious. Eventually, after a few days, only one flower was left with Raveler. Elena kept coming to her room and taking them bit by bit. One day, she even skipped waking Raveler up and just took the flowers, leaving a note. Only one rapier remained, so the heroine had to get more as quickly as possible. The problem was, she didn't know if the boy found the note, and she couldn't just wait around. Raveler decided to check if the note was still there. But when she walked into the corridor, she found total chaos. Injured people were sprawled everywhere, and no one could even give them first aid because the battle dragged on. Servants crouched over one of them, whispering he'd last no more than 3 hours without a mage or priest. Knowing she couldn't sneak past unnoticed, Raveler decided to try escaping through her window. But the servants' conversation made her pause. Since the person injured by the magical beast was a commoner, they were slow to help him. Hearing that, Revealer stepped out from behind the door and walked over to the guy. She knew the poison from the bite could reach his heart any second, and the last rapier flower she had might just save him. Honestly, she didn't want to do this at all. Her mind flashed to a vision of herself sitting at a table, nibbling pastries, her own blood smearing the background. Even though she'd been carrying that last flower everywhere to keep it from getting stolen, the girl still plucked a petal off it. Rapier flowers take forever to wilt, but once they start, they lose all their healing power. Knowing the flower only had 2 days left, Revealer handed the petal to the guy and told him to eat it to stop the poison. He obeyed, parting his dry lips, and the girl dropped the petal into his mouth. Since giving up a flower like that was basically sharing your own life, Revealer told the guy to pay her back someday. Sighing, hoping he'd make it, the heroine went back to her room. She managed to sneak out of the castle and didn't return until 6 hours later. The girl was wiped out, but still felt it was worth it, even though she never saw that boy again. There was no note on his grave. Plus, Revealer kept the princess's last flower safe, and when the princess came to her, the heroine said bugs had eaten it. She collapsed onto the bed to finally catch some sleep. Suddenly, the balcony door burst open, and the girl heard someone standing right behind her. She spun around and saw a boy with red eyes, her heart leaping at the sight of him. But he didn't even say hi, just strode up to her, pinned her against the bed, and demanded to know what secret she had about him. The girl realized he'd found her letter. She was so glad to see him, she didn't even notice his weird behavior. He replayed the letter in his head, where Revealer had written that she knew his secret and would reveal it face to face. When he finally realized she'd just been messing with him, she apologized. She clung to him, explaining why she'd done it. But when he tried to pull away, she held on like a vice and begged him not to leave. Revealer promised she'd let him go if he heard her out. She reminded him to take care of the life he'd saved and thanked him again for saving her. She was sure she'd only made it because of him. That's why she wanted to thank him in person. Seizing the moment, she asked where he'd gotten those flowers. She explained the ones he'd brought last time had already wilted. He promised to tell her if she let him go. She agreed, but only if he gave her his hand to make sure he wouldn't run off. The kid knew there was no use fighting back, so the heroine yanked him along. Stepping out of the castle, he took confident strides, leading her through the woods they both knew. At one point, Revealer paused to catch her breath, but they'd already reached their destination. Without letting go of his hand, the heroine lifted her head and scanned the area. They stood on a meadow blanketed in rapeseed flowers. Overwhelmed by the magical blooms, Revealer flung herself at his neck and called him her guardian angel. Since he'd saved her life when no one else cared, the heroine promised to guard him from now on. She reached up to his face, asking him to wait for her, vowing to come back next time. Brushing his cheek, she added, she hoped when the time came, His Highness would tell her his real name. The kid's eyes flashed with unmistakable shock. He asked how she knew that, but Revealer just smiled. The heroine told him to reach out if he ever needed anything. After all, he'd helped her knowing she was from the Felicity bloodline. After a week of rest, Revealer returned to her work. While sampling the pastries spread out on the table, she tried to figure out why the palace was so loud. The maids were buzzing around the castle, sorting and stacking gift boxes everywhere. From their words, the girl realized they were setting up rewards for the villagers who'd recently hunted magical beasts. She had no doubt that giving the last rapier flower to that injured guy was the right call. Well, she found more, and since then she'd been eating a petal each morning, keeping a few extra just in case, so now she didn't have to worry about her life. Revealer was checking another dish when the princess burst into the dining hall screaming. She rushed over to the heroine, excited to have her back. Revealer didn't know how to handle such a big emotional display, so she stammered that she was glad to see Alina too. The princess threw her arms around the girl, ignoring the maid's reminder that she needed to eat and then hand out the gifts. The heroine felt uncomfortable in Alina's hug and silently prayed the princess would let go soon. Finally, the princess let Revealer go and asked why she was still checking the food for poisons. Alina was confused why the girl refused to become her lady-in-waiting, and though Revealer just didn't want to, she claimed she liked the job of protecting the princess. The maids listened as the girl said she was happy to do it if it helped atone for her sins. The heroine gave a super sweet, innocent look and asked the princess to hear her one request. Before she could finish, Alina declared they should be friends from now on. The maid pulled the princess aside and reminded her that Revealer was from a family planning a rebellion. Alina really wanted to be friends with the girl who had poisoned herself and ended up saving her life. To the heroine's surprise, the maid suddenly said that if the princess wants it, the emperor would probably grant his daughter's wish. Alina happily grabbed her new friend's hand, completely missing how much the girl hated the idea. She was thinking about how long this world would make her suffer, but all she said was a thank you for the princess's kindness. Up north, in the dead forest, stood the ancient Kwaru Castle. The red-eyed boy sat on the windowsill. Memories of Revealer flooded his mind one after another. He thought about her promise to be his guardian angel and protect him. The boy caught himself thinking he was waiting for her to finally come to him. Meanwhile, Revealer was spending a lot of time with the princess. Now they even ate lunch together. The heroine was already tired of eating sweets all the time, but was too scared to say no to Alina. so she faked that she liked them. Turns out, the maid Renuel was to blame. She told the princess that Revler loved marshmallows, but the heroine had no choice, so she kept choking down those hated sweets. Now they even served her tea. Basically, her job as a taster got easier. Revler didn't have to taste everything anymore, just whatever the princess handed her. Still, the heroine couldn't get used to being treated so carefully. Revler suddenly noticed Todori leaves on the plate she'd read about in an encyclopedia. It's a herb that's supposed to purify blood, but if a kid under 10 eats it, it can give them stomach cramps. The heroine decided to ask the maid if she'd really seen those Todori leaves in the dish. The maid took a few steps back, confused why Revler assumed their stomachs couldn't handle that plant. The girl smiled and said she'd read it up to be a helpful taste tester for the princess. Ranulé sent maid Julia to double-check the dish's ingredients and bring the head chef. But when he arrived, he got all huffy and said those leaves don't have those effects. They're just for flavor. Yet the maid confirmed all the additions list those effects, and the princess could have been in danger. Revler felt the cook glaring at her, though he was the one at fault. Ranulé told the chef to be more careful, and he apologized, dreading he might lose his job. Elena rushed to hug her new friend, who'd just saved her life again. Revler noticed the maids were eyeing them weirdly, like they'd suddenly changed their minds about her. But all she really wanted at that moment was for the princess to finally let her go. When the heroine finally slipped away, she headed to the palace's noble wing. The maids helped her wrap up work early, so she made it here on time. Revealer planned to say goodbye to Duke Vicheliberry and wrote him a letter. After thinking it over for a while, she decided to repay the Duke for his kindness. She was sure this would clear her debt to him. But while walking past one of the studies, Revealer overheard people talking about the Duke. Peering inside, she saw a few aristocrats discussing Vicheliberry's refusal to follow the Emperor's order. They thought the war needed to end immediately for the princess. Revealer remembered the novel's second part said the Duke had spent 10 years preparing for a battlefield rebellion. If the war in Posterimo wasn't even about rebellion, then Vicheliberry hadn't made up his mind to rebel yet. She recalled the Duke once saying he went after the throne because the war was getting to him and he wanted some excitement. Even though the book claimed Cassius actually started a rebellion over such a trivial reason, Revealer didn't buy that he was the type. She'd heard the Duke fought his heart out until the very end during the last war. Revealer figured there had to be a different reason behind the rebellion. Maybe the Emperor made the first move since taking down Vicheliberry would be wiping out the last threat to the throne. And with the Felicity clan's downfall, the imperial family would have total power. If things really were that way, Ravane probably couldn't have changed much. Still, she didn't lose hope that Vicheliberry could turn things around. If the Duke's son decided to fight, no one could stop him. This is about another main character from the novel, Rowan Vicheliberry. He's that yandere guy who killed his abusive dad after years of abuse, then devoted himself completely to the princess. Even if Ravane had exposed the imperial family's betrayal, it wouldn't have mattered if Rowan killed his dad, like in the original story. So she decided to take a different approach. She approached Cassius's carriage, silently apologized, and whispered she was praying for the Duke's success in the war. Then she knocked on the carriage window and slipped her letter under the door. She thanked the Duke for his care and added a warning to be cautious with his staff. Her father had said a bearded man seemed suspicious. Cassius, who desperately needed support at that moment, smiled. It surprised Hanan. The Duke tucked the note into his pocket and asked his aide to find a way to set up a private meeting with the girl. It was a clear, sunny day, and the princess was enjoying the day with her father and Raveler. Elena kept badgering her friend to eat more cake. She insisted the girl was too skinny and needed to take better care of herself. After watching the scene for a bit, the Emperor reminded his daughter he was right there. He said it with such glee that Eileen instantly apologized and explained she was super worried about Revler. The Emperor ruffled her hair and told her to take care of herself and not skip meals. Without a second thought, Eileen blurted out that she'd been trying hard to catch Revler's attention lately. The heroine braced for the Emperor's anger, but the princess quickly launched into the story about the Todori leaves. She grabbed the girl's hand, impressed by her smarts. Without Revler, disaster could have happened. The heroine lowered her eyes and thanked Eileen, who'd been sticking around way more since then. Once, the princess even showed up at a picnic with the Empire's legal code. She figured Revler was pretending not to know a thing about the laws. The heroine blushed in shame, but told herself side characters were bound to be clueless. But Eileen didn't even flinch, vowing to teach her. Her friend was smart and would pick it up fast. The Emperor studied Revler silently, making her squirm under his intense stare. Then he turned to his daughter, asking about the tea ceremony she was organizing. Remembering all she still needed to prep, Eileen hugged her dad. Then she waved him off until dinner and dashed off to work. Revealer let out a relieved sigh. glad it was all over, and started packing up herself. But it turned out she was getting ahead of herself. The Emperor suddenly spoke to her. He crossed his arms sternly and called her a traitor to Felicity. Then he demanded she remember that Vishelaberi was a threat to the one who'd kept her alive. The Emperor warned that if anything happened to his daughter, her fate would be far worse. The heroine bowed and told him she'd burn his words into her heart. Even though meeting the Emperor chipped away at Revealer's resolve every time, she wasn't about to forgive her family's sworn enemy. The days leading up to the princess's first tea party were absolutely brutal. Every day, the heroine showed up in the kitchen, double-checking every ingredient and tasting each dish. When she had free time, Revealer pitched in with the maids and still had to memorize the guest list. Before she could catch her breath, the day of the tea ceremony arrived. The mothers of the invited kids whispered about Felicity's daughter during the reception. They thought she seemed pretty at ease, too young to grasp what was going on. Revealer, though, was already completely drained by the time the ceremony started. She realized it was a mistake to volunteer for the job just to keep her distance from the princess. And there she was, the star of the show finally stepping onto the stage, lighting up the room with that dazzling smile of hers. The guests erupted in delight at the princess's entrance. Alina raised her glass, greeted the crowd, and wished everyone a great time. But things quickly got chaotic. Among the guests were a bunch of kids throwing fits and causing a ruckus. Revealer kept calm, sticking to her job of serving the older guests. The boys she brought pastries to wanted to ditch the noisy table and get closer to the princess. They wanted to hear Alina's stories, not the screaming brats. They were fed up with just sitting there, stuffing their faces with food served by servants. Revealer did her best to stay cool, biting her tongue through all this mess. She already had enough to handle, and these brats were taking out their frustrations on her. Deep down, she wanted to quit right there. But first, she had to deal with those screaming tykes. Revealer was already rolling up her sleeves to head their way, when suddenly a commotion at the princess's table made her freeze. Lady Brown cut in, saying Lady Jacqueline's comments about the princess were flat-out disrespectful. But Alina shot back, annoyed. "Are you even aware of what you're doing?" Lady Brown flinched, caught off guard by the princess's sharp reaction to her kind gesture. But Alina was dead set on it. She alone decided if her words insulted Lady Jacqueline. Standing there, the girl had no idea how to respond. She'd defended the princess with the best of intentions. Watching the scene, Raviel thought it was plain dumb for Lady Brown to turn on Elena's best friend. Donna Jacqueline was a noble who'd reunited with her family because of the princess. Even though she'd just returned to nobility, she'd later rise as a key figure dominating the novel's high society. The same couldn't be said for Lady Brown, who clearly did it just to get in the princess's good graces. Her inexperience made her move reckless, but Alina didn't need to be so harsh. The heroine's thoughts were cut short by kids yelling again over their toys. Raviel headed to the kids and called, "Raise your hands if you want to play with dolls." Grabbing some toy figures, she set up a puppet show for the kids. She picked a love story about a prince and princess who beat the odds together. The kids watched with wide eyes and excitement. Raviel's eyes lit up as she told the fairy tale where everyone lived happily ever after. The other guests leaned in, hanging on every word of her story. The kids begged for another story, and with a smile, she began a new one, wondering where the hell the servants were, since that was their job. She was trying to stay under the radar, since Rainiel warned her to keep it together. The aristocrats were already all over her, but somehow she ended up doing someone else's job. She started telling the next story, this time about dragons. But in her head, she was thinking this event was totally not kid-friendly. A few days later, Rainiel called Ravel in and said the kids at the tea party were really grateful to her. The head maid told the girl to take the gifts they sent as a thank you. Rivel, thinking the gifts were meant for the princess, double-checked if she could actually take them. Rainiel told her to just grab the boxes and thank the kids. After all, she said, the guests only enjoyed the tea party because of Ravel. The girl obediently lowered her head and thanked the maid. As she was leaving the room, Rainiel suddenly stopped her and asked if she'd offended the Imperial Knights. The girl froze and stared at the head maid in shock. She said the Imperial Knights were looking for a kid from the infirmary where Ravel had been spotted. They looked pretty angry, so Rainiel wanted to make sure the girl knew nothing about it. Hearing that, the girl dropped the gift boxes from her hands. The maid looked at her closely. Raveler managed to quickly get a hold of herself and apologized, saying she hadn't seen anything and couldn't help. Back in her room, the girl collapsed onto her knees by her bed, completely drained. Just thinking about why the knights were searching for her and why they looked so angry made her shake all over. She had only given the injured man a rapier leaf and hoped he'd survive. Raveler suddenly imagined that guy dying, and the knights who saw her with him turning their blame on her. The thought of being suspected of the knight's death now sent panic through her. The girl paced the room, unable to sit still from the worry. She could clear things up by revealing the truth about the flower, but that meant a new poison would emerge, one the rapier couldn't save her from. But the idea of what might happen if the misunderstanding wasn't cleared up terrified Raveler, so she'd just have to hope for the best, since the investigation would prove the rapier wasn't a poisonous flower. Raveler curled up under a blanket, needing to rest for a bit. She decided not to leave the castle unless necessary, and to avoid the knights as much as possible. Raveler only regretted she couldn't see the boy she'd promised to visit. And even though she'd resolved to avoid the knights as much as possible, she ran into the captain the very next day. He gave Revealer a hard look, and straight up asked if she really gave the medicine to Sir Eden. Dominic Carlson was a top Imperial knight, dedicated to serving the princess. The girl couldn't believe she was actually facing him. Wait, during the tasting, he was giving Revealer that weird look, so she knew something was off right away. No way out. So the girl admitted she did give Eden the medicine, but fudged the part about where it came from. She claimed it was the Felicity family's secret remedy, a universal antidote crafted by their family sage, Torwish Loran. Carlson bought it. The Felicity family's trade company had a stellar reputation in pharma. He apologized for scaring the girl and told her to chill. He wasn't about to accuse her of anything. The knight captain suddenly dropped to one knee in front of Revealer, admitted he should have cut to the chase, and thanked her up front for saving Sir Eden. The girl was floored that someone like him would kneel before her. Turns out there was a misunderstanding. Eden was looking for someone trying to kill him, not the person who saved his life. Carlson ruffled her hair in approval and thanked her again for saving the night. The girl felt that weird flutter in her chest again. Leaning in, the captain promised to help with anything she needed, anytime. Revealer figured she really shouldn't get any more involved in this. There's nothing good about getting tied up with the novel's characters, but the memory of the promise she made to that red-eyed kid kept gnawing at her. So she stopped Carlson, grabbed his coat, and blurted out that she wanted to ask him a favor. When the captain turned around, Revealer asked if she could meet the Great Duke. When the heroine decided to take a gamble, she never imagined Carlson would actually say yes. A few days later, she was standing in the forest waiting for the bodyguard the captain had assigned. He warned her the Emperor was watching the Duke like a hawk, and if something went down, Carlson himself wouldn't let it slide. Revealer tried to shake off the bad vibes. Right then, footsteps echoed from behind, and a stranger's voice greeted her. When she turned around, she was totally shocked. The knight she'd saved introduced himself as Iriel Eden from the First Order, and said he was on duty to guard her tonight. He looked so different that Revealer didn't recognize him at first. Iriel thanked her for saving his life, then apologized up front before easily lifting her up in his arms. Since the mountain route was too dangerous, the knight was assigned as Revealer's escort. He decided to carry her, apologizing all the way for being late and blaming it on his legs still being slow after his long illness. Revealer looked worried, but he quickly assured her everything was fine now, just a bit less stamina, that's all. Still, the heroine pointed out he shouldn't push himself too hard. He'd been given a second chance, after all. Eden chuckled and said he'd remember this forever, but Revealer thought his laughter was out of place. He might never see her again and needed to take care of himself. Since the knight didn't get why she felt that way, the girl reminded him she was the princess's taster, and from the Felicity family to boot. Suddenly, Eden locked eyes with Revealer, then reached out to smooth a strand of her hair. Then, out of nowhere, he asked if she was secretly planning to leave the Imperial Palace. The heroine figured it might be a test of her loyalty, so she firmly said everything was fine with her and she'd keep serving Her Highness. At Revealer's declaration, she wanted to repay the princess for her kindness. The knight just smiled. As expected from the First Order, they were all Alina fanatics, but the heroine never imagined they'd catch her off guard like this. But Eden suddenly added that if Revealer ever needed his help, he'd be there for her. Finally, towering gates emerged from the trees, and the knight announced they'd arrived. The heroine gazed around the dark, imposing castle of the Great Duke in surprise. Revealer had always wondered why the Imperial Palace was situated near the dead forest, and now it hit her. It was all to hide this castle. Eden reminded the girl of the captain's warning. This place was off-limits to everyone. He'd said there were always prying eyes and ears around, and that made Revealer realize someone was watching them. The knight promised to wait by the entrance, and she headed into the castle. The dust on the railings made it clear. This place was abandoned and no one cared about it. The more she thought about it, the weirder everything got. She couldn't figure out why the Emperor locked up the Great Duke and still kept such a problematic person alive. In the original story, the Duke was only mentioned once. Liam killed all his siblings, locked up his nephew, and took the throne for himself. After that, Eileen became the Emperor's only known living relative, and it made sense to assume the nephew was dead. But Revealer knew he was still alive, and the only reason was that Liam still needed him. She found the boy at the window he loved to stand by, gazing at the forest. He turned at the sound of her footsteps and asked why she was here. Revealer smiled and said she'd come to learn his name just as she promised. The Emperor, unlike his nephew, the Great Duke, had no legitimacy. He was a power-hungry usurper. Without legitimacy, he had plenty of enemies eager to overthrow him. On the other side was the Great Duke, son of the former crown prince, and he was the only legitimate heir to the throne. The cunning Emperor saw an opportunity, because anyone planning to rebel against his rule would first need to find the Great Duke. That's why he's allowed to walk freely in the palace, using him as bait to lure out traitors. The boy gave Rapier a sharp look and asked why she wanted to know his name. She replied she wanted to befriend him, but the Duke turned away and told her to leave and never show her face again. Rapier understood his caution made sense, since both of them were the Emperor's most hated children. She promised not to come if it annoyed him, but admitted she didn't want to miss the chance to talk. After a moment's thought, Rapier shifted from formal to friendly with the Duke. She, a bit late, asked to properly introduce herself. The girl gave her name and said she loves reading all kinds of books. Rapier said her favorite book is the biography of adventurer Kevin. Someday she wants to board a big ship and go on a grand adventure like Kevin. The Duke called that dream ridiculous, since she'd never escape this place. But the heroine didn't back down. She declared she'd quit for good once she'd done her time as the princess's servant. The boy rolled his eyes at her words, but Raveler reminded him she meant to be happy, just like he was. Though he was a duke, he thought it was absurd. But the girl said she'd help make it real for him, so she told him to let her know when he finally started trusting her. Then she whispered in his ear, "I'll show you the way to happiness." As Raveler raced after the Duke, descending the stairs with questions about their next meeting, someone watched them from above. The cloaked man noted how Felicity and the Duke had clearly grown close. He smirked toward them and muttered, "Time to take care of the girl." From his office, the Emperor watched everything unfold through a magical orb. He ordered his men not to touch Raveler. His daughter liked her. But truth be told, this whole mess was pissing the Emperor off. Still, Liam was certain he had time to figure out how to take them both down. Elena's professor was blown away by her work. He called it a groundbreaking discovery. The princess humbly replied the professor was overdoing it, but the man insisted it was conference-worthy. Raveler listened as the professor passionately offered to help the princess prepare her presentation. She found it amusing how drastically the original plot had changed. In the original story, the glory for the discovery was supposed to be hers. The lesson wrapped up, and the professor said goodbye to her student. The maids offered tired Alina a quick snack after class. Raveler was a bit scared that the amount of poisoned food had gone way up lately. Alina walked over to the girl who'd been silently sewing by the window. She invited Raveler to join her lessons and grabbed her hand, pulling her along. Raveler wasn't too keen on it since it was hard to pretend she knew nothing. But the princess was set on studying with Raveler. Raniel leaned in and started praising Alina's smarts. Then she added that no matter how smart Raveler was, it'd be hard to keep up with the princess. Raveler backed the maid up. After all, Alina had made a historical discovery, and she couldn't hold a candle to that. Since the princess was stressing over who poisoned Raveler last time, Raniel quickly tried to reassure her. She said the Emperor had taken charge of the investigation and would definitely track down the culprit. The heroine doubted this, because in the original story, the culprit's true identity didn't come out until 10 years later. His goal was to steal the Emperor's family right when he was happiest. That meant he was just testing out poisons, and hadn't actually planned to kill the princess yet. The maid brought fruit to Raveler's table, which totally caught Elin off guard. But the girl just said she was fine with it and grabbed a whole pile for herself. For some reason, these fruits looked way more fancy than usual, and Raveler didn't get why something like that would go to someone like her. But seeing the maid's reaction, the heroine's half-bitten apple slipped right out of her hand. Meanwhile, Elin was super glad the girl was getting along with everyone. But this whole vibe was really getting under Raveler's skin. Lying on the bed, she griped about how people treated her based on the princess's mood. The girl turned to the Duke sitting nearby and asked what he thought about it. But he had no idea why she was asking him and told her to stop interrupting his reading. Ignoring his request, Raveler offered to show the Duke the books she'd set aside in the next room. Turns out it was just an excuse. She'd left a note in one of them about the only way the Duke could survive. The kid figured these books were probably about adventures or travel. Raveler couldn't get how anyone could be unimpressed by the endless blue of the sea and a light breeze. She demanded he promise to read those books for sure. The Duke leaned back on his cushions and told Raveler to leave with a bored look. He was tired. He tossed the book on the floor. The heroine couldn't wrap her head around how he could be done after just half an hour. Before heading out, she reminded him once more to read what she brought over. Raveler glanced at the Duke. He was lying there, turned away, not even giving her a second look. Still knowing this was the only place she felt completely at ease, the heroine stayed a while longer. A few days later, the princess headed out on a boat ride with her friends. She wanted to introduce Raveler to the girls who were eager to learn more about her. The heroine sat at the table, feeling like she didn't belong. The princess's friends curiously eyeing their princess's personal taster, who had impressed everyone during tea. Donna couldn't believe how Raveler was so good with people, especially since Donna had a fight with Lady Brown. Michelle Talia, daughter of a powerful marquess, was furious that her friend brought up that topic again. In her opinion, hanging out with someone like Brown could ruin your reputation. Elena figured Donna had nothing to feel guilty about. The whole mess was the other girl's fault. Michelle said she'd love to get back at Brown, but their family's business is already in ruins. They've paid their price. She said it was obvious the Emperor adores his daughter. Elena gasped when she heard her friends think her dad had something to do with it. But her shock turned to embarrassment and pride in her dad, fast enough to surprise Railver. Railver couldn't wrap her head around how normal people could act so cheerful about someone else's bad luck. Monica dropped it like a bomb. She'd just heard about Prince Vishelaberry. Elena felt relief when she heard he was fine and had just started learning how to run his lands. The girls were even thrown by how intense the princess's reaction was. Then Michelle added that the soldiers sent to war in Rubendisi, the Vishelaberry fiefdom, were already back. The Duke was ordered to lead another campaign, but refused. The girls were furious, but only Railver got how much blood that war could spill. But Railver tried to push away the thought that her friends had zero compassion. Staring at the smooth lake, Railver wondered how nice it'd be to see the ocean. She watched the fish gliding calmly nearby, wondering how amazing it would be if this lake connected to the ocean. Suddenly, a loud splash echoed, and rocks tumbled from the shore into the lake. The maid checked on the girls, and for safety's sake decided they needed to head back to solid ground ASAP. Even though Revealer had no clue what was going on, she somehow felt guilty about it. Since the landslide forced them to end their walk, the girls decided to have a picnic to cheer themselves up. The heroine just wanted it all to be over. Imagining how many times she'd eaten poisoned food that day was terrifying. Suddenly, the princess turned to Revealer and asked if they'd done anything to hurt her. She got the vibe the girl wasn't thrilled about their Witchelberry chat, but the heroine quickly assured Elena that wasn't the case. Flustered by the princess bringing it up so openly, Revealer insisted she had zero contact with the Duke. She tried to blame her gloomy mood on being sleepy after eating way too much good food. Hearing about the tasty food, the princess suddenly suggested a Revealer join her at the festival. Even though the idea totally creeped her out, the heroine forced a cheerful act. Elena promised her friends they'd go together, and hurried to confirm they didn't mind bringing Revealer along. But the heroine knew from the original story that the festival was tied to the princess's kidnapping arc. She was just a side character, easy prey to get caught in the crossfire and die. Railver knew agreeing was a bad idea, but the princess was way too excited to care. She knew there was no getting out of it now, so they all disguised themselves and headed to the festival. Railver kept stressing about a possible kidnapping, but Elena was over the moon about their little outing. Grabbing her by the wrist, Elena insisted they check out the circus while waiting for the others. Since it was safer than wandering off, the heroine followed along. But the circus was packed. Railver lost Elena in the crowd. The heroine was nearly trampled, but somehow wriggled free. It hit her then. She'd lost the princess. Panic set in as the reality of it all sank in. The sun was setting, and she hadn't found anyone from her group. She couldn't wrap her head around the fact Elena hadn't noticed she was gone, and gone looking for her. Railver knew wandering around was a bad idea, so she stayed put until everyone regrouped. Just then, she spotted two kids nearby who'd lost their mother and were panicking. She tried to calm them down, showing the kids where to find security staff if they needed help. Looking into their tear-streaked eyes, Rapier offered to help. The kids explained their mom told them to stay put if they got lost. Even though they were right, Rapier knew that if they told the guards, the parents would be found quicker. After a quick think, the girl decided to focus first on making the kids feel safe. So she walked over and offered to tell them a story while they waited for their mom. As Rapier told a fairy tale about a princess, Elena came around the corner. Her friends were stunned again by how good she was at connecting with people. But Elena didn't share their excitement, silently watching Rapier with a troubled look. Michelle snapped at Donna, saying she shouldn't talk that way about a traitor in front of the princess. But Elena suddenly turned and, as if nothing happened, declared that Ravier was really a good kid. The scene suddenly cuts to older memories of the princess speaking to her friend. She asks why Ravier, no matter what happens, always stays kind. Because Elena had never been able to do that. The lost kid's mom was finally found, and they happily thanked Ravier before saying goodbye. The city was already cloaked in darkness, and the girl couldn't figure out why no one had come to look for her yet. She hadn't gone to the guards to risk exposing the princess, and was just about to go there when suddenly she heard footsteps nearby. Elena faked looking worried, dashed to Rayler, and said she'd been walking a friend home. The heroine asked the princess if she was too tired. She noticed the princess looked kind of down. Then Elena suggested they go to the Flower Lantern Festival. Even though it was past midnight, she grabbed the girl's hand, regretting they hadn't gotten to spend time together. The princess suggested buying some lanterns and taking them along. Raylar obediently followed, hoping the Imperial Knights were nearby and everything would be okay. When they reached the stall, Elena asked the vendor for 2 lanterns. The heroine smiled, but she was really tense. Meanwhile, the woman in the blood-stained cloak reported through her magic earring that the knights were destroyed. In response, she received an order to capture the princess. Rayler thought she'd heard something strange. A chill ran down her spine, but Elena didn't notice anything. She showed the girl the lake dotted with flower lanterns, and they gazed at its beauty in awe for a while. The princess asked Revealer if she liked these flowers. The girl pointed out they were the same color as Elena's eyes. Elena whispered that Revealer was truly kind, but the girl didn't catch her words. Suddenly, Elena confessed she'd known about the girl for a long time. But when the heroine asked what she meant, Elena declared the palace had its ears to the ground. Everyone says Revealer's sharp and capable of anything. Elena found the girl's expression at that moment amusing. She said she'd been admiring her for a while. In Elena's eyes, just by existing, Revealer brought people joy. The girl realized Elena was trying to say something, but couldn't grasp what exactly. Still, she noticed Elena's mood had lifted. And that was what mattered. But suddenly, a cloaked figure emerged behind Elena. And now Revealer understood where that lingering sense of danger had been coming from all along. The stranger swung, and the heroine lunged forward to shield the princess. The strike hit Revealer's head, and she blacked out. Waking up, the girl saw Elena's anxious face staring back at her. The heroine sprang up, checking if the princess was all right. She spotted a scratch on her palm and froze, imagining the Emperor's rage when he saw it. It wasn't until now that Raveler realized they were in some rundown hut. Their disguise was gone. Obviously, a lot of time had passed, and they were miles from the capital now. Raveler knew the guards would show up any minute and sweep the princess to safety. But just as she was about to tell Elena to wait calmly for help, the girl vanished again. The heroine caught her fidgeting in the corner of the room. A minute later, the princess spun around, beaming at Raveler and holding up a hole in the wall. The girl tried to hold Elena back, arguing they should wait for the knights. But Elena was adamant. They had to run. She begged Raveler to trust her, insisting everything would work out. Figuring she'd have to give in, the heroine suggested checking if it was safe outside first. But the princess wasn't listening. She was already scrambling into the opening. As the girl pleaded with her to at least look around, footsteps echoed nearby. A man's voice grumbled about the trouble these brats were causing. A scarred man crouched over the girls, shaking his head at Elena's dumbass move. The princess threw herself in front of Raveler, threatening the criminal he wouldn't get away with it. But her attempt to scare him failed. She could tell he was certain no one would come help the girls. Raveler realized this was the work of the faction opposing the Emperor. And once again, she was stunned at how many enemies he had. According to the man, the Emperor was in mortal danger and could have already been trapped. Elena's usual confidence vanished in an instant, her face betraying fear. She demanded to know what they planned to do with his father. Though the criminal refused to answer, she kept pressing him. Fed up with the provocation, the man kicked the wall furiously. He told the girls to crawl back into the hut for their own good. He grabbed Elena's hand, and she struggled to break free. Raveler caught the bandit's arm and demanded he release the princess immediately. In reality, she was worried the girl might end up with bruises. She knew the Emperor would blame her. The man just laughed at Raveler's boldness and threatened to kill her. He told her to stop underestimating him, then grabbed the girl by her dress and yanked her off the ground. The heroine turned to Elena, winked, and signaled for her to run and fetch the Emperor. However, the princess didn't move an inch. She bent down, grabbed a rock off the ground, and swung it toward the criminal. But Elena obviously wasn't great with aim. The rock smacked straight into Raveler's forehead. The girl blacked out again and crumpled to the ground. Her last thought before passing out? Why do novel protagonists always mess up so bad? The story loops back to when Raveler, tied up, was lying in one of the storage boxes at the hut. She hears the knights and Emperor storming in, rushing to save Eileen. Her mouth was gagged. She tried to signal she was here too, but for some reason, no one noticed. While Eileen was sobbing in her father's arms, Raveler shook the box from the inside. The Emperor glanced her way, but acted like he hadn't noticed a thing. The exact moment Liam suggested taking his daughter home, Raveler realized they were leaving her behind. She'd had enough of being the background character. She'd done everything she could to protect the princess. The maids were informed the princess had been found at last. When Raelia heard they'd be heading back to the palace with the Emperor, she dropped to her knees. The second maid asked the knight what had happened to Raveler. He says there's no news on her. The girl's probably dead. A great duke happens to overhear their conversation while strolling through the garden. What he hears doesn't compute. The kid refuses to believe Raveler is dead. His legs carry him into the heart of the dead forest, gradually picking up speed into a run. At first, the duke thought Raveler was an imperial spy, a gorgeous girl his age sent to shadow his every move. The first time he saw her, he was mesmerized by those incredible hair colors. The duke never imagined he'd see her again, yet they kept running into each other, over and over. Eventually, he got curious. What future was she talking about? Stranded in the same spot as the duke, Raveler still held on to hope. He wondered how far she'd go. When he reaches the rapeseed field, the duke stops. Deep down, he's sure she couldn't have died. He yells he knows they're here, and he's ready to do His Majesty's bidding. Sure enough, cloaked figures are hiding in the trees and behind them. The duke demands they take him to the Emperor, right now. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Raveler struggles against tight ropes. She finally manages to untangle her hands. Even though the heroine managed to climb out of the box and escape, she has no idea what to do next. After she was abandoned, going back to the palace would be humiliating, but hiding is way too risky. Just as she thinks she could use a break, someone pops up behind her. A woman with a bow and arrow's eyes Raveler curiously, realizing she's never seen her around here before. The hunters worry about what a kid is doing in a place like this, and the heroine realizes how lucky she got running into them. She kicks her acting skills into high gear, tears in her eyes, saying she was playing hide-and-seek with her mom and got lost. The strangers listen with sympathy. They offer to let her stay and treat her to dinner until they find her mom. Since Raveler finds it weird how conveniently she ran into them, the heroine decides to stay on her toes and make a break for it later. But she doesn't stay alert for long. Once she's by the fire, digging into a hot meal, her guard drops. Raveler can't figure out how she slipped into their group so easily. It hits her that getting out might not be so simple. Suddenly, the woman reaches out and spots something she didn't notice at first. The scratches on the girl's face tell a story. She's been through the ringer. She promises to head to the village at dawn and get someone to tend to her wounds. Rivel figures nothing bad will happen if she rests a bit, so she thanks the strangers. The heroine feels the crushing weight of exhaustion, while the people around her admire her healthy appetite. She's calm because, just in case, she ate a rapier flower before dinner. But suddenly, she feels a total loss of strength in her whole body. Rivel collapses, thinking she trusted these strangers for nothing. As she blacks out, she hears them wish her a good night. With arms crossed and a smug grin, the Emperor asks what's going on since the Duke came to him personally. Kneeling before him, the boy vows to play his part if Liam wants it done. He's ready to die for the imperial family. The Duke declares he's heading to war, and if he gets a chance to prove his loyalty, he'll hunt down whoever took the princess. After laying Ravel in bed, Jessie worries the sedatives might have been too strong. Her partner Tom calls her a fool for being soft. She botched the princess kidnapping, and now she's fretting over someone who could be a spy. The heroine isn't asleep and hears every word, so now it hits her. These people are working with the kidnappers. Meanwhile, the man and woman argue how they'd never be in this mess if the Emperor was dead. They're real down that the prince isn't with them. Tom tells Jessie to not get attached to the girl and give her the sedative again later. When they leave the room, Raveler stands up and plops down on the bed. Looks like more people hate the Emperor than she realized. If these kidnappers were halfway decent, the heroine might even think about working with them. But they're rank amateurs. Walking up to the table, Raveler spots the plant they use to make the sedative sitting there. If the base of that herb is what she thinks it is, she can neutralize it with a rapier. The girl shoves her hand in her pocket and pulls out a pouch of flowers. Dumping them into her palm, she gets it. Why she fell asleep. Every single bud is shriveled up. A glowing butterfly slams through the window and zips toward Raveler. It feels like she's seen it before. The heroine suddenly wonders how she even managed to wake up in the first place. Maybe she just built up immunity to all that poison after all those taste tests. Raveler flops back down on the bed and yanks the blanket over herself. She's got to take this chance and run as fast as she can. But she ain't going back to the palace. She's pretty sure no one's even looking for her. Memories of the great Duke flash through her mind. Tears well up in her eyes. Raveler has no idea where to go. 3 days have passed. And in that time, the heroine managed to pick up some info from Tom and Jesse's conversations. For example, this tiny village is full of people whose lives the Emperor destroyed. Knights who fled endless imperial campaigns, craftsmen banished simply because Alina stubbed her toe on their wares. There are plenty of the Emperor's old inner circle, and Raveler thought some of them might recognize her. She decides to bail out of the house ASAP. The guards are patrolling the other side of the village right now. She tosses a pillow and blanket on the bed to look like a sleeping person, then climbs onto the windowsill. But just then, Jessie walks in, rubbing her eyes sleepily. She jumps down just in time and hopes Jessie won't check the bed. Raveler clamps her hand over her mouth and hears footsteps approaching. Then Jessie calls out, "Are you asleep?" Realizing she's been caught, Raveler gives it everything she's got to get out of there fast. Not knowing the way, she bolts for the woods, hoping to shake whoever's chasing her. First, the heroine decides to hide. The criminals with torches are already scouring the whole forest for her. Raveler hears them talking about how she's a spy, otherwise that strong sedative would have knocked her out. As she thinks about how to escape this mess, the heroine suddenly spots a familiar glow in the grass. She inches closer and sees the butterfly that flew into her room 3 days ago. Just as she thinks the butterfly is leading her somewhere, Tom finds Raveler. He smirks, noting how good the girl is at hide and seek. Tom swings a torch over Raveler's head, and she squeezes her eyes shut. But when she opens her eyes, someone's already stabbed her pursuer with a sword. As Tom falls, Raveler's shocked to see the Duke behind him. When asked how he got here, the kid suddenly says, "You wanted to know my name." The Duke smiles and says his name's Kalakis Benoa Tristan. Raveler throws her arms around the Duke, tears of joy in her eyes. Kalakis gently strokes her face. The knights grab the rest of the criminals, tie them up, and tell them not to even think about running. Once they're gone, the heroine sits beside the Duke, catching her breath after all that. Her eyes all puffy from crying, she asks why they went through all that trouble for her. Even Lord Eden from the First Order of Knights jumped right into the search without a second thought after hearing about the kidnapping. Kalakis gives the knight a tired look when he starts apologizing for being late. But Rapier cheerfully thanks Eden for helping out. The Duke leans over the girl, reaches toward her face, and calls her by name. He brushes a leaf from her hair, and the heroine asks His Highness what's going on. But he frowns and reminds the girl she told him his name already. Now Rapier realizes Kalakis is jealous and quickly assures him he's her only friend. Yet the Duke insists she stop calling him that. He wants her to use his name and treat him just like before. Rapier laughs and promises the same. Sitting by the fire with Kalakis, the heroine asks how he got here and why he's wearing night gear. Looking him over carefully, she wonders if something went down between him and the Emperor. Cassius pulls out a crumpled note and says he did what she told him to. Told Liam he's off to war. Rapier notices the note he left in the book. Now Kalakis is asking the girl to tell him the truth about why the only way for him to survive is to join the war. The heroine isn't surprised the Duke wants to know the truth. She convinced him to march into a bloody civil war with allied forces that's going to burn for over 10 years. She didn't want to send him there, but there's no other option. Raveler says the campaign will be led by Duke Vishelleberry, so she wants Kalakis to secure his support, especially since he's the heir of the Trishine clan. The Duke wants to know how his family ties into Vishelleberry. Then the girl tells him about Armantium, the metal deposits in the Trishine lands the Duke's been hunting for years. Raveler tells Kalakis to use that to earn Vishelleberry's trust and turn him into an ally. Still, the boy isn't sure if that'll work. After a beat, the heroine says the village is full of people the Emperor ruined. Even though most want revenge and waste their last days on it, they still build families and dream of a future. Raveler presses her palm to Kalakis's arm and says they can do the same. She tells him to just be happy and walk to the sea together. Her words light a spark in him, and he grins at her. Brushing his fingers across her face, he nods and accepts her plan. He's determined to do everything he can to make sure they're happy. No more running away. Knowing she can't hide from the Emperor, the heroine changes her strategy and plans to fit in perfectly at the palace. So the next day, she kneels before the princess. With determination in her eyes, she asks Alina for forgiveness for failing to protect her, even though it was her duty. Hours earlier, while riding in the carriage with Kalakis, Raveler told him her decision. She'll tell everyone she tried to protect the princess. That way, she plans to make sure people treat her how she deserves. She believes it's the only way to survive in the palace. After a pause, Kalakis suggests the girl just run away with him instead. Because even if the princess acknowledges Raveler's efforts, the Emperor's opinion won't change. Plus, Kalakis was afraid to leave her alone after heading off to war. He offers to take her anywhere she wants if Raveler is willing. But the heroine knows they can't escape the Emperor no matter how hard they try. She thanks Kalakis for caring, but insists she has to return to the palace, for both their sakes. The girl declares she doesn't care if her efforts are recognized. Even if they aren't, she'll find another way. She told the Duke not to worry and reminded him they'd decided to live life to the fullest. Kalakis smiled, thinking how Raveler had always been like that. He really had no reason to worry. He knew now wasn't the time to get stuck in his head over it. The heroine called him to the window to watch the sunrise together. Glancing at his sword, Kalakis realized he needed to find enough strength to protect himself. He turned to Raveler and asked her to bring more books next time. Kalakis smiled and offered to read them together. The heroine laughed and promised to bring a mountain of books. Meanwhile, Elena got a carrier pigeon message. Raveler was coming back. She ran to Raniel with the news, tears of joy in her eyes, and said she was glad the girl was okay. The princess thought she'd killed Raveler with that rock. There was so much blood everywhere, and Elena had never seen anything like it before. So when she found out Raveler was alive, the princess was happy, but also terrified. She feared the girl hated her and would tell everyone it was all her fault. But it seemed she had nothing to worry about. Raveler, kneeling there, said she was living for her now. The princess rushes to the girl and tries to help her up from her knees, but she resists, still blaming herself for what happened. Realizing Ravel doesn't hold any grudges, Eileen's eyes well up with tears. She tells her to stop putting herself down. No matter what others say, she's her savior. The princess asks Raniel to bring the gift she prepared for Ravel. When Eileen opens the box, the heroine freezes in shock. The princess smiles, hands Ravel a uniform, and offers her the position of personal maid. She says she even talked to her father to get her forgiven, and the girl thanks her for it. Hugging Ravel, Eileen tells her she no longer has to be a taster. The heroine bows and promises to serve the princess with all her heart. Eileen feels great about herself because she looks incredibly generous in the eyes of everyone around her. But her mood darkens when she overhears the maids chatting. The maids are impressed that Ravel defended the princess at her own risk, and the princess came out unscathed. Glancing around, Eileen realizes everyone's only talking about that girl. It infuriates her because she's the one who rescued Ravel, who was nearly a slave and gave her a normal life. Jealousy and resentment start to overwhelm the princess. Revealer bows to Elena and reminds her that lunchtime's here. Smiling, the girl says she'll never forget the princess's kindness. At that moment, Elena realizes she's overthinking. After all, everyone still admires her in this life. She waves Revealer off, telling her to take a good rest. Elena believed no one could take away what was hers, but she noticed how much attention people gave Revealer and how they'd light up when they saw her. Watching from the sidelines, Elena suddenly wonders why all her bad vibes always end up being right. Ever since the heroine went to the ends of the earth to prove her loyalty, her daily life totally flipped. People started treating her differently. Hell, they even gave her a new room. Revealer was served top-notch food and dressed in nice clothes. Her reputation took a major shift, and more people started depending on her. The girl was in high demand. Everyone wanted her help. But Revealer was kinda annoyed. The princess gave her days off, yet everyone kept bugging her for help. Now, standing there with a rag in hand, the heroine can't figure out why everyone suddenly jumped on her back. But she doesn't have a choice, so right now she's dutifully dusting away. Raveler's racing to wrap up everything so she can finally catch a break. Now she realizes a maid's been standing by the whole time, and probably heard every word. The stunned servant drops the boxes and locks eyes with the girl. Then she asks if this is really the maid everyone's always buzzing about. Grabbing Raveler's shocked hands, she blurts out she's been a fan forever and wanted to meet her. Though Raveler's still clueless, the maid clearly thinks she's amazing. She dives in to help gather the fallen boxes. While the maid gushes over her kindness, Raveler's just trying to wrap this up fast. After collecting everything, the maid thanks her again and wishes her a great day. Raveler can't recall the last time someone said something like that, and decides from now on, every day will be great. If people come to her for help, they must recognize her. Now she'll give it her all. From the balcony, Elena watches, fury bubbling inside her. Michelle and Donna spot her interest and ask what's got her attention. Strapping on a calm smile, Elena says she just wanted some fresh air. But she adds the sun was way brighter than she expected. Raveler's so-called week-long break is over, and she's back to her maid duties. Even after the job change, her tasks are almost the same. After she sweeps the floors, she heads to the kitchen to check supplies and wash dishes. Miss Tarrant walks in, pets her head, and notices how tough it must be for her. But Raveler sees it as just her duties, nothing special. But the woman's intense stare makes her feel like she messed up somehow. Then Miss Tarrant suddenly says she has a proposition for Raveler. If she helps out, she can take a lunch break today. The idea of leaving early is so appealing, she jumps at it without thinking. Tarrant explains she needs a model to pick out the princess's outfit since she's returning late today. She doesn't think Raveler's short stature is an issue since she'll account for the adjustments. The heroine tries on the wig, though she's unsure if she's got it on right. When she steps out to Tarrant, the woman freezes in shock. But Raveler did mess up the wig, slanted sideways, so the woman tells her to sit and helps adjust it properly. Lady Tarrant points out that the girl really pulls off this hair color, though the pink makes her look more vibrant and adorable. The woman asks Ravel to wait a sec while she grabs some clothes. The heroine spots a dress sketch on the table and thinks she's seen it somewhere before. Ravel is stunned that Tarrant sews the princess's gowns herself. Seeing the girl hold the sketch, the woman says it's just a rough draft. The truth is, she's dreamed since childhood of designing princess outfits, and now she finally gets to do it. That's why the dress design felt familiar to Raval. Miss Tarrant is Elena's personal designer. In 10 years, she'll be dictating fashion trends for high society and swearing to sew only for the princess as a thank you for making her dream come true. When Ravel read this, she found it inspiring, but now she feels bad that such a talent will be wasted on just one person. She asks if Tarrant wants to open her own studio, but the woman says she's got neither the money nor the talent for it. The heroine tells her to stop being humble, saying she's sure people will line up for her designs. Lady Tarrant would love for the girl's words to come true and promises to sew a dress for her as a thank you. The heroine is amazed at how bright the eyes of a determined person can shine. The woman hopes that if she ever opens a studio, her first client will be Ravel. Deep down, the girl hopes one day she'll be able to wear such beautiful things and live by following her heart. Thinking of Kalakis, the heroine feels a deep longing and a strong urge to see him again. A few days pass, and the Duke is training in the courtyard of his castle. Suddenly, from the forest, Raveler steps out with a basket in hand, smiling. The girl immediately notices Kalakis has gotten bigger from training and tells him right away. Since he needs to eat well, Raveler hands the boy a basket of treats. They spread out a blanket under the tree's shade and sit down to have a snack. Kalakis is surprised where Raveler got all that tasty food, and the girl explains she's now the princess's personal maid. The Duke responds coldly, saying he's glad she got what she wanted. Then he announces the war departure date is set, and a heavy cloud of dread settles over the heroine. Kalakis says he'll leave very soon, but he doesn't know the exact day yet. The uncertainty of when they'll have to part makes the girl sad, but she tells herself not to dwell on it, jumps up, and calls the Duke to follow her. In response to his surprise, Raveler declares they need to make as many good memories as possible before he leaves. As night falls, the heroine leads Kalakis to a pond where the fish glow in every color of the rainbow. Looking at the girl, the Duke says it's really beautiful. For a moment, the heroine thinks he's talking about her. Ravel praises herself for coming up with such a great bit of fun. She brags that she's got a better handle on it than him, and that's when Kalakis notices something. He rushes to the girl, swipes a strand from the heroine's forehead, and asks, "Where'd you get this scar?" Ravel explains how the princess accidentally hit her with a rock during the kidnapping. But then she realizes that can't be true. When she escaped the crate, she didn't feel a thing on her forehead. Kalakis grabs the girl's face, regrets not seeing it earlier, and worries she was hurting. Ravel feels him too close, shoves the Duke back, and insists she's okay, but she miscalculates the strength. Kalakis goes tumbling straight into the lake. The girl reaches out, apologizes, and explains she got flustered. He was just too close. When she steps closer, she spots something weird on his back, and he decides to spill everything. In Kalakis's memories of warm protection, one moment stands out. The Emperor stares at him, wild-eyed. Finally seeing the real dragon power, the little Duke hugs his mother tight, wings huge and spread behind him. The Emperor's stunned. The ancient power from the first emperors hidden in Kalakis's pitiful little body. The kid's crying, tears streaming down his face, eyes full of hatred for Liam. The despised emperor claimed the kid actually has potential, unlike his parents. But since Kalakis still couldn't control it, Liam declared he'd find a use for him himself. So they sealed the Duke's body to suppress the dragon power. 5 years in northern exile, and he only just came back. Raveler knows this power is the key to ruling the empire and being every woman's favorite. But this kind of allure turned into a nightmare, didn't it? She steps up to the kid and says, "You're seriously strong." According to Kalakis, it was 5 years ago when he was just a kid. But if he made it through, then yeah, he's definitely got strength. Raveler grabs his hand, presses it against her forehead. "You must have gone through hell for that." Until now, Kalakis always thought his life was just waiting for the end. But But now he thinks it was waiting to meet Raveler. He pulls the girl close. It's okay now. That's all in the past. Kalakis feels like, starting today, all that really is in the past. Because now he's got a reason to live. If he can be the one Raveler can count on, then he's got to find his own path forward. And at the end of that road? The death of the one who tore everything down. So now Kalakis is sure Liam's gonna get what's coming to him. Since the wind's getting chilly, the boy suggests Raveler head back, and she follows, promising to read before bed. The next day at the princess's castle, the maids can't stop raving about the heroine's housework skills. The girl gives a shy smile. Julia apologizes to the girl for being a total jerk to her. But Raveler figures Julia's got nothing to apologize for. She remembers the maid treated her to some tasty fruit. With the maids distracted by their gossip, the heroine sneaks out of the room unnoticed. Everyone's been piling on the praise so much that the girl sometimes feels outright weird about it. Adjusting the curtains, she wonders if folks finally stopped hating her. Suddenly, Raveler hears the princess's voice from behind and turns to see her sitting at the table. It's the first time they've run into each other since the girl became a maid. The heroine catches that Alina's been dealing with a ton of stress lately. Raveler walks up and asks what's got her thinking so hard. Alina sighs. She just can't get the letter right. She hasn't spoken to this person in forever and wants to check in, but the whole thing feels awkward. When Raveler finds out the letter's for a guy, she immediately pegs it as being about Roy. The main character, Alina, started chatting up back when she was this age. The princess gazes off into the distance, telling the girl how focused and smart he is, and how great he is with a sword. Raveler gives Eliana a few pointers on how to phrase her thoughts better. The princess thanks the girl for her help and asks Raniele to fetch her some fresh paper for writing. The heroine feels good, knowing she managed to lift Eliana's spirits a bit. The maid hands the princess the paper and leads Raveler away from her desk. She tells her to step out so Eliana can concentrate. Raniele praises the girl for getting better each day and tells her to keep it up. Hearing this, Eliana freezes completely, forgetting about her letter. Squeezing the envelope in frustration, she wonders what makes Raveler so special. Helping the princess is the maid's job, yet somehow she gets praised for just doing it. Even though Eliana doesn't want to think badly about any of this, sometimes she wishes Raveler would just disappear. Since those thoughts first came to her, she hasn't felt right. Leaning back in her chair, Eliana thinks how awful she is. Snapped at Raveler over nothing, then sulked all day. The princess resolves to put an end to this. She took charge of this girl after all. She grabs the flower vase and heads off to apologize and finally shake off this annoying feeling. Alina leaves the room but stops when she hears the maids' voices. They tell Raveler not to stress so much and say nobody's perfect. The girl replies she's fine, just scared the princess will feel awkward because she's not competent enough. One maid ruffles her hair and says Raveler's a smart kid and they've got a lot to learn from her. Hearing that, Alina's anger flares up again. She can't figure out why everyone looks up to this rebel instead of her. The princess hurls the vase at the floor in a rage. The maids spin around when they hear the glass shatter. Peeking through the door, they're stunned to spot the princess standing there. The maids rush to Alina to check she's not injured. Tears stream down the princess's face as she realizes she smashed the vase just to be noticed. Alina bolts before she can take another second, shouting she needs time alone. Pausing in the hallway, she wonders how Raveler makes everything seem so easy when she had to give it her all. To earn her father's attention, praise, or even love, Alina had to adjust, measure, and guess, just to get something. The princess is shaking all over from the injustice she's feeling, and the emperor notices her like this. He asks his daughter what's wrong, and she throws herself into his arms. Liam holds the girl close, but she keeps insisting she's fine. The emperor hears Revealer trying to track down Alina and figures she's behind it all. Smirking, he offers his daughter a way to fix everything. The princess stares at her father confused, and he explains he'll do whatever it takes. If it'll make Alina happy, he can send Revealer to the mines or lock her up in an abandoned palace. The emperor suggests either getting the girl out of sight or officially adopting her as a reward. For his daughter's sake, Liam's willing to do anything. Alina, looking at the one person who's always stood by her, asks him to go ahead. They'll send Revealer off for adoption somewhere far. It's the best way to make both girls happy. A week later at the aristocratic academy, the emperor tells his close advisors that a girl recently saved the princess's life. As a reward, they're going to give her a new family of her choosing, picked by Alina herself. The emperor demands that anyone wanting to be selected raise their hands. Since the royal family backs adoption, the gathered nobles see it as a chance. So a sea of hands goes up, and everyone's trying to outshout each other. The emperor thought no one would volunteer, so now he's sighing in relief. Elena's trying to figure out who to pick as Ravelier's new dad. That baron's estate is only a day's ride from the capital. The marquis is half a day away, and the Count's plains lands have easy access. Elena's thinking, why is there no family living farther from the imperial palace? Then her eyes land on Baron Tiger, whose estate's far away and he has no kids. Deciding Ravalier could live in peace there, Elna points her finger at him. Duke Vishelaberry, seated next to the Baron, catches on. He doesn't even flinch, just nudges Tiger aside and steps in front of him. The second Elna announces her choice, her fingers pointing straight at the Duke. Only now does the princess realize what just happened. Vishelaberry bows and says he'll take the girl since the princess has decided. He grins at Elena, who's clueless why the Duke's even at this meeting. The Emperor double-checks with his daughter. Did she really pick that guy? The princess is panicking and doesn't know what to say. Because if she changes her mind now and picks Baron Tiger, who's clearly not cut out to be a dad, everyone's gonna be disappointed in her. So Alina hides her face and confirms her choice. Duke Vishelaberry. That makes him the girl's adoptive father, and he thanks the Emperor for the honor. The princess tells herself this was her goal all along. Get Ravalier as far away as possible. The Duke's lands are a world away from the capital. But Elena's worried. Royan lives there. She hopes that with the adoption, nothing will really change, and that it's the best move, for Ravalier and for herself. The heroine's in the middle of her chores when Rainial suddenly pops in with the news. The Emperor wants to see her. The maid also tells her she's been officially adopted by Duke Vishelaberry. Ravalier has no clue what's going on. She tried to stay out of his life completely, and now this? Does she mess up so bad in the palace that her whole plan went down the drain? Rainial's all over it. Best news ever. The girl needs a family. She tells Ravalier to pack up right after the audience. The Duke wants her gone by today. Ravalier can't believe this. Just like that, she's shipped off to a family where the son's plotting to kill his own dad? She feels like she's just starting to get her footing here. And now she's back to square one? Ravalier steps into the throne room, where the Emperor is already waiting for her. He eyes the girl and declares he doesn't trust her, even though she swears loyalty to the princess. Knowing she can't afford to look weak, the heroine pleads, "Tell me what I need to do to earn your trust." The Emperor remarks she's got plenty of guts and snaps his fingers. He says there's only one way for Ravalier to win his trust. The assistant opens a chest, and the heroine spots vials of some kind of potion inside. The Emperor gives her two choices: sacrifice her life, or report every detail about Witchleberry back to him. If she's certain she can handle it, Ravalier must drink this poison, even though there's an antidote in the chest that won't fully heal her. The heroine realizes Liam plans to keep her on a leash until the day she dies. Now she regrets ever telling the Duke about the sorcerer. Ravalier stands up, grabs a vial from the chest, and drinks it with determination. Her throat spasms, and it becomes hard to breathe. She reaches for the second vial. Feeling for the antidote, Ravalier downs the second bottle. Liam warns her to watch her back if she doesn't want to vanish, since she's not the only spy in the Duke's house. Kneeling, the heroine vows to the Emperor she'll never forget this. She hopes deep down she can take revenge on him someday when she's strong enough. Hours later, Ravalier is about to leave the castle, her stomach aching unbearably. She managed to say goodbye to the maids while the carriage was being loaded. But it feels wrong to just leave like this, like she's being swept away by the current. Even if she didn't make any plans, she can't just ride off like this. She scans the Duke's subjects, and the man himself, waiting for her by the carriage. The steward is about to escort Ravalier, but she asks him to hold on a second. The girl walks up to Vishelaberry and greets him. First, she thanks the Duke for accepting her into his family. Then Ravalier asks if it's not too forward, if she can have a few minutes before leaving. She knows there's no other chance, and says there's one friend she wants to say goodbye to. The girl bows to the Duke and asks for mercy. But Vishelaberry cuts in. "You don't need to talk about mercy. Ravalier is my daughter now." Then he adds, "And if you're asking about the great Duke, he's already gone." She can't believe her ears, and Vishelaberry repeats, "If it's about that boy, he left on a quest today." Ravalier catches on that Kalakis lied when he said he didn't know the exact date. The girl bolts and runs off, and the Duke's servants give chase. Vishelaberry watches her go in silence, memories of last night flooding back. That kid crept up to him from behind, unnoticed. But the Duke recognized the boy instantly. Those red eyes were unmistakable. "No need for introductions," Kalakis said. "Saves time on the small talk." He cut to the chase. "Tomorrow, we declare war on the Allied States." Then the kid dropped a bomb. "Save me!" In exchange, he promised the Duke the adamantium silver he'd been hunting for ages. When asked where he got the info, Kalakis shrugged. "Doesn't matter. What counts is I can help." Plus, he reminded the Duke, he's the real imperial heir bloodline Vishelaberry's been chasing. Bragging about royal blood in front of a guy everyone calls the Emperor's hound? Real ballsy move. But if this kid's willing to fight for his life, he's got the grit to last, just like that girl. So Vishelaberi muttered, "Felicity's got a habit of sticking her nose where it doesn't belong. He said the Emperor can't ignore even someone like us." Kalakis turned away. "Don't know what you're talking about." The Duke adjusts his cuffs and says a caravan arrives every 3 days at 5 a.m., loaded with military supplies. He hands Kalakis his cufflink, telling him to present it to the caravan. If he lasts until then, he'll make it. Kalakis asks if Vishelaberi's helping, because he's friends with Revealer. The Duke replies it's definitely one of the reasons. He just doesn't get how kids like them could be to blame. Vishelaberi ruffles Kalakis's hair, saying he's just doing his duty as an adult. But Kalakis knows aiding him is straight-up betrayal of the Emperor. The next morning, the Great Duke is told it's time to leave as he sits by his parents' grave. Kalakis springs up instantly. He's ready to hit the road. He leaves a small bouquet of rapier flowers on the grave and heads out. He knows he can't fully trust the Duke's words. Pretty words come easy to anyone. Before Kalakis takes more than a few steps, a familiar voice calls his name from behind. Revealer sprints up, panting hard, and starts screaming at him. She slaps him hard and calls him an idiot. She's furious he left without saying goodbye. They're not strangers to each other. Revealer weeps, insisting she came to say goodbye even after being adopted. Kalakis admits he didn't know how to say it out loud, so he sent a letter to the palace instead. She got the letter, but she just doesn't get how he could write something like that and send it. She hands the boy his note and declares she still hasn't forgiven him, so he's got to come back alive if he wants to keep his promise. Kalakis glances at the letter he wrote, inviting Revealer to see the ocean together once he gets back. At the bottom, she scribbled, he's an idiot and that she hates him. The Duke laughed it off and promised he'd make it right. He thanks Revealer for wishing him luck, and they hug tight. After parting with Kalakis, the heroine makes her way to Duke Vishelaberi's capital residence. She never thought they'd have to say goodbye this quickly. Revealer's confident he'll manage, but she still can't stop worrying about him. The carriage finally pulls up to the Duke's estate. Stepping out, she wonders how her life will turn out now that she's just been adopted into the main character's family. Revealer's afraid she'll end up just scraping by again, like she did in the palace. She's so tired of fighting. But when she steps inside, the servants greet her with unexpected friendliness. They all greet Revel, offering their help, food, and rest after the journey. The heroine can't believe they're showing her this much joy. Sitting on the bed, she watches the servants unpack her stuff in her suite. Truthfully, she's already forgotten what it's like to be a kid. The maid suddenly asks if it's too loud in here, but Revel doesn't get her question. The maid explains they found out about the adoption last minute and didn't prepare much. From what she says, everything in Vishelaberi runs strict. This whole time, they've only seen the back of the Duke and the young master. Now they can't help but admire this sweet, doll-like lady. Realizing she didn't introduce herself, the maid speaks up. She says her name is Charlotte, and she'll be Revel's personal maid. Impressed by her energy, the girl replies it's nice to meet her and hopes they get along. Shoving the assistant out of the room, the woman leaves Revel to rest and promises to visit tomorrow morning. After they're gone, the heroine feels the first wave of anxiety slip away. Obviously, she won't have to live on edge here. Looking at the boxes, she can't remember ever having so many things. Suddenly, a small chest catches her eye. She just can't remember if she's seen him somewhere before. Reveler freezes in shock when she opens the box. Inside is an antidote, a clear sign of the Emperor's blackmail. That means Liam's always watching her from wherever he is. The girl's glad she met Kalakis before leaving. Now she's got a pouch of Rapunzel flowers. The heroine doesn't hesitate, quickly downing the bottle's contents. Even with the flowers, Reveler plans to stick with the antidote for now, because if she recovers too fast, Liam will catch on. So now she's got one more decision to make. She needs to track down the Emperor's spy, survive in that distant residence, and stay off the main hero's radar, the one who started all this. She's not sure if staying in this house was the right move, but for now, Reveler decides to get some sleep and figure out the rest later. Today's been a real drain. The next morning, the girl wakes up with a killer cold. The Duke sees her condition and orders Charlotte to call a doctor. But the heroine can't let it come out. She drank the poison, or she'll be dead. So she's trying to convince the Duke it's overkill, and that she just recently ate the princess's poisoned food. Even though Reveler says her fever's from the antidote, Vishelaberi has no clue which potion is causing such a high temperature. He tells her not to be stubborn for no reason. Her immune system's weakened, and they need to find a cure fast. But the heroine keeps insisting she's perfectly fine, though the Duke knows Felicity's too smart to push back without a reason. He suddenly sits next to her on the bed and gently lays her head on his lap. Reveler is stunned when Vishelaberi suddenly says that someone once said the daughter is as fragile as glass. The girl recalls her father bandaging a wound, telling her she's as fragile as glass, and how it hurts him to say it. Vichelaberry gently covers her eyes with his hand and tells her to get some rest. Meanwhile, young Mr. Vichelaberry is training on the practice grounds at the fencing academy. The errand boy apologizes for cutting into his training session. He says an urgent message from the Duke has just come in. Royan tucks a stray hair behind his ear and asks what the message says. After a pause, the errand boy reveals the Duke has taken the girl in as his ward. Royan freezes, trying to wrap his head around what he just heard.